If you feel weird, that's just the way you have to feel if you want to change something. If you feel comfortable, then something is wrong.
Welcome to this space of conversations with game changers.
These meaningful conversations with those who we have found are connected to their purpose from within, who are able to express that purpose in a really unique way, and through that are bringing transformation to the world in different ways.
We are interested in people who aim to change the game and create new narratives that open new possibilities for them and for all of us.
We are Purpose+Motion, and we support organizations to connect with their purpose and then get in motion, in action.
The potential we help them unlock allows them to stabilize through transitions, create healthier work environments, and scale their positive impact in the world.
Enjoy these conversations.
And please let us know what you think in the comments below.
Welcome everybody to this space of interviews. Today, Mike and I are with Gana Meissner, Gana, who is one participant of the Gamechangers roundtable that we are conducting at Factory Berlin. Gana works at Porsche Digital and has been an integral part of the work that we have been doing with corporate partners in that space. So welcome, Gana, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Well, thanks for having me, Pablo and Mike.
Just to kick off this conversation, would you like to share a little bit with us your background in a nutshell? What have you been doing in the past years, and what do you do exactly in Porsche Digital?
All right. Well, so my background is basically innovation, product development, and specifically, I've spent most of my time working for various design departments for OEMs, for car manufacturers, including Volkswagen and now Porsche. But I've been mostly focusing kind of on the early stage of development and really exploring what are new opportunities in the space of mobility and looking beyond just automobiles, just generally what does mobility mean in the general sense, and how could this be enabled? So they're basically applied kind of my training as a designer, as a product designer, so not just focusing on digital, but also physical products, services. And so basically took that experience now into this new entity, which was set up just a couple months ago within Porsche Digital. And our primary focus is to explore beyond kind of our core business of creating amazing sports cars and actually exploring where does the future lead us to, and can we as a bigger corporation help entrepreneurs and people that maybe also fall in the realm of being game changers and help them in the very early phases to explore those ideas and then create ventures and help them basically get started. So in a nutshell, we're basically engaging in venture building, company building. I mean, there's different terminologies for this. So I'm basically bringing in my expertise, like what does it mean to create a product? You know, what is relevant, what's maybe not, different methods of creating things at the end of the day.
So what I hear is you're in some ways moving to support others in, changing the game a little bit and doing things differently and like that. And what is it that really excites you about that, or that got you interested in going down that path?
Well, I guess maybe it's partially my personal motivation of, being part of an organization that, is not just out there for themselves, but, encourages others to participate and pursue their dreams, no matter how crazy they are, as long as, they're good for someone, and hopefully for most of us. So it's a personal motivation that actually now resonates also with the motivation of the larger organization, and also realizing that me as an individual or even a corporation such as Porsche can't change that much, right? I mean, there's so many things to be done, and it needs to rely on so many other perspectives and capabilities. So by encouraging and enabling those folks, I think it's maybe a more sustainable path than trying to do everything yourself.
Mm-hmm. You were just mentioning how the big corporations as Porsche find it sometimes difficult to change as an organization. And of course, here in Germany, the car industry is the lead of the leading industry in a way. So they are big corporations, and the challenge that they have is to adapt to these new times. So the question that I would have for you right now is, what have been the biggest or most important challenges that you've faced in inspiring others to think outside the box, innovate, and change?
First of all, I would argue that, you know, it's not just big corporations that are challenged by change or, you know, have a difficult time changing. I mean, it's every human being. I mean, me, for example, I'm trying to change my diet. It's crazy hard. So why would I expect a corporation to be able to change but easier than I can do? And I think at the end of the day, a corporation is just a conglomerate or a community of people. And it's even harder to get all those different interests aligned so you can maybe change course. And on the other hand, I also, and that was partially the motivation of creating this new entity, is acknowledging that maybe there is no real need for a big organization to change, because if we're successful, you know, if we can provide a lot of people an amazing place to work and have a livelihood through that, and be profitable at the end, then what's the incentive for change? So I would argue that maybe we can enable others to, you know, chart their own path and create something that you know, supports humanity and keeps us moving further as kind of as human beings, as opposed to every organization needs to change. I mean, maybe, you know, a car company can create amazing cars. Why would it start building rocket ships? There's no point in doing it. Why don't you just set up a new company that does that and then find a way to be involved in it somehow if it's relevant? So I know that there's a lot of discussion around, you know, how can we change and all that, but I'm like, it also takes something from people, and that's something I found in an organization. If you come in and say, oh, I have all these ideas and I want to do things differently, for the people that are there, it always feels like they either haven't done a great job or whatever they're doing is not relevant anymore. And I think it's a really difficult place to start a conversation from. So best thing is to acknowledge what they've been doing is amazing, and maybe I can add something to the conversation. If not, maybe it's not the best choice to do it within that organization. Maybe you have to find a different way, because I would make them unhappy and I would be unhappy. So what's the whole point of doing this? You know?
That's a really good point, and it's actually one of the most difficult things for us as consultants, for example. Is so a key principle that we bring always, this meeting people where they are at, as opposed to, as you say, coming in and judging and saying you're doing it wrong. But what I really also like in what you're saying is this, in a sense, that there are different levels of changing the game, where part of it is already a big step, is saying, you know, we can maintain the way we've worked for a long time, which works, which gives people livelihoods, which allows people to have healthy and good work. And we can support others in doing really the sort of sustainable, purposeful, creative stuff outside. And then I guess, as opposed to trying to make the big shift happen inside, which would be the sort of, you know, the radical extension of that thinking, right? Yeah. And I've seen that, for example, with VW also supporting a lot of social businesses, but themselves not obviously at this stage saying, hey, we're going to become a social business, purpose-driven and like that. And there are other examples, like the Royal Bank of Scotland recently shifted its main guiding principles from, you know, shareholder value to purpose, to a purpose that is clearly enunciated and written by the board. And so it's interesting to see, where do you think the line lies between companies that need to do that, that have, as you say, like an added value from following a purpose, a social or environmental purpose that they're fulfilling, and ones that at this stage really should focus more on supporting outside of them that sort of change?
First of all, I think this push for trying to find what the purpose of an organization is certainly something that is kind of hot now. But I would argue, I mean, if you're a successful business, there is some purpose behind that. Maybe it's a different kind. So maybe it's less about kind of questioning whether there has been a purpose, but more like aligning it to the values, the changing values of kind of what's relevant outside of the organization, or aligning it within the organization. Maybe over time things get kind of scattered and you just need to kind of refocus on what you're really good at. I guess it's good to think about it in an organization, to realign, especially when you've gone through like phases of scaling it up, you know, especially, for example, Porsche has been growing quite substantially over the past decade. So obviously as an organization, it's quite a challenge to keep everyone still kind of aligned to what the purpose of this organization is. So it's just part of the kind of the growth process. So it's not just about startups, you know, pivoting and growing. It's also about organization. They're also constantly growing. So you need to actively work on this. So I guess the bigger it is, the organization is, the more challenging is to align all these different perspectives on what the purpose of an organization could be. And I think herein lies a lot of inefficiency. And, you know, one group's doing that because they think that's the purpose of an organization. The other one's doing that. And trying to just finding a way to get there. But maybe it just has to be like that, just like in any other political system. It's the conversation, it's the dialogue. As long as you do that, it will kind of find a balance. If you don't, then you have politics, and then, you know, things go south. So
yeah, as you were saying before, to change is hard. To change as individuals is hard. To change as an organization is hard. And for us, purpose gives meaning to that, or gives us energy to actually transform and change. And you were mentioning in our previous roundtable something that really got us curious to speak further with you, which was the importance that you give to redesign our thinking. Of course, this may have to do with where you focus, with the initial design phases of designing a product. But I would like to ask you, what does the redesigning our thinking means, and if this is something that could support individuals and organizations to change?
Well, so this kind of idea isn't something that, you know, I just came up with, obviously, within design, education, design discipline, or, you know, any other innovation entities. There's always this idea about, you know, you first need to understand the problem, and sometimes what is in front of you may not be the problem. So you have to kind of find ways to figure out what is kind of the root cause of the problem. What is the problem that it causes whatever you initially assumed as a problem. So that thought process, I think, is what where a lot of potential lies in, to really at the end come up with something that is meaningful. And so as a product designer, you typically assume you know what the problem is, but throughout the process of making certain assumptions, creating a first prototype, then testing it and reevaluating it, it's not necessarily about designing the product, but trying to understand the problem better. So at the end of the day, whatever you create fulfills that or meets those requirements. So by starting at the very beginning and say, okay, the way I think, the assumptions I make, that dictates which way I will be looking at and thinking. So I need to change that way of thinking in order to come to a different conclusion. So, I mean, it's a small thing. I mean, it's this glass half full or half empty analogy, right? I mean, depending on how you look at it, it looks completely different and you will come to different conclusions. So it's about how can you kind of train yourself or almost trick yourself in thinking in a different way. So.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have a concrete example of that?
Well, by now I've been collecting so many different strategies to approach it. So, I mean, part of it is like from observations of, to be quite honest, I haven't applied it. Maybe I've subconsciously applied it, but first of all, assuming like one way to do is assuming a different perspective, right? And through either conversation or traveling or whatever, that's how you, so to say, get out of your comfort zone and assume a different perspective. That, you know, is a quite challenging way to do it because most of the time you're still sitting in the office. So to actually reach out and then actually involve yourself in someone else's lives is quite challenging. So, you know, you have ethnographies or you have the field research that helps you do that type of a thing. So you can go through it as a very structured process, or you just use it to remind yourself to go out there and just talk to some person you haven't talked to, just simple things. But there's other ways that are maybe more structured, for example, by looking at, or, you know, as you live your life, there's always something that catches your attention, and then start asking like, why is it that what I'm seeing is interesting to me? And then start asking all these questions and really investigating. You take it from one place to another. That takes your thinking in a different way, as opposed to responding through that initial observations, like, oh, I already know what that meant, and having those assumptions. But going after it is like resisting that impulse to think you already have an answer to what you've seen that. So it's kind of tricking your mind all the time and you know, guiding your views. But I also devised a couple more structured methods to do that. I mean, but it would be, I guess, too elaborate to go into this.
Maybe not. We'll see. But because what I really find interesting about your way of thinking this is that it's about assuming a different perspective, challenging assumptions, following your intuition. That for me, those are key ways of being of game changers. You cannot change the game if you're not able to challenge assumptions. You cannot change the game if you're not willing to assume a different perspective or to follow your intuition, which is really interesting because you're talking about a way of being and approaching not only designing a product, but actually any type of challenge that we have in life. And of course, for me, the biggest challenge of that is not only to do it individually, but to do it as a team, to do it as an organization. So I was wondering if in your role as leader of teams, how have you been able to encourage and incentivize the people working with you and for you to challenge those old assumptions?
Well, I'm not sure if I did that actively in my prior roles, because typically I would come into in your organization, and then, you know, people know that, you know, for instance, in my last role, I was I was asked to establish a UX design practice within Porsche, and there wasn't such a thing at that point, so it was new to begin with. So people already knew that when I would come in, I would bring in something new. And that makes it much easier for me to challenge a lot of things because it's what people expect from me. But then by just being who I am, but coming in this very different context, I was approaching things differently to begin with. You know, I would feel like this is weird. I feel a bit out of place. I think that was kind of the initial feeling for the first half year. But resisting that and it's like just keep going. I think that would be my best advice for someone that is in that same situation. It's like, if you feel weird, that's just the way you have to feel if you want to change something. If you feel comfortable, then something is wrong. So I guess as a human being, you're trying to please everyone and not kind of create that inner tension. But in that sense, I guess resist it, and that will permeate and that will show in the way you work, and people will observe you. And I was quite surprised like how many people are actually were looking at how I did things and what I did. I typically don't really care about that as much, being that visible. So but after a while, after a couple of years, people would come to me, it's like, oh, this was really inspirational. And I would go like, what do you mean? It's just, I didn't do that on purpose, but I guess it was about doing things differently than wherever you apply your craft is kind of standing out. So by just doing that, I think there will be people that will gravitate towards that. And then they would start building kind of almost this culture of doing things as a group in that way. And then what happened towards the end was that, our team grew, but we all had the same kind of mentality. I was saying, questioning the status quo. And obviously I picked people that were thinking alike, and I didn't want anyone in there that would just kind of tag along. I wanted those people that you can argue with and have a fight with, and not, they weren't there to please me, and they were always bringing in something new that I wasn't capable of doing. And so being comfortable with all that, I think, will eventually shape this group of people that are just eager to, knock on doors and, giving other people a hard time, but in a good sense, right? I mean, we're not doing it to drive people mad.
Besides everything that is important to have clarity on, and the type of people that you bring together, you mentioned two elements that have to do with somatics. You mentioned two elements that have to do with the way that we emotionally are able to sustain that uncomfortable feeling of not knowing, of being challenged. This is a set of emotional skills that not all people, not all teams have. This is one. And the second one is to be able to sustain the tension as well, which is something that our body needs to get used to, because some people are not willing or used, or really don't want to go into places or conversations where there's tension. And I see in your answer that this was in some moments really important, to be able to challenge those assumptions and perspectives.
On a collective level, helping a team to be in that uncomfortable place, because on your individual level, you can go and do, and you've got that skill, but to bring people together and help them to have those kind of argumentative conversations, challenging conversations, and yet still have trust that that's okay, or challenge, or and we often refer to that as psychological safety, and in a team that, to be sustainably effective and performing, that's important. But I'm interested, how did you foster that? Even once you brought in people who already thought like that, how do you foster that in a team to continue being safe, disagreeing, and being challenging?
I think what definitely helped was that the team wasn't that big, I mean, at the end, I think times were like 12 or 13 people, and it was still doable, but you could sense like the bigger this entity gets, the more difficult it becomes. It's much easier to, I guess that's about the size of a football team, right? So you can do that in that size. As it becomes bigger, it's almost impossible to, there will be factions within there. They will start breaking up. So maybe there's a natural law to this. So as we were growing as a group, I mean, it was, I guess, very important to bring in people that have that mentality and have the capability to tag along and also fight their own fights. And the way I I would encourage it is by kind of, it's just like with kids, right? When they do something right, you say you did a great job, and if they do something that doesn't meet your criteria, you tell them that as well. So I guess my criteria was like being a pain in the ass to other people. So if they did that, I would pat them on the back, you know. So you could definitely sense in the group there was this feeling of we had an opponent, right? We were almost kind of like in a constant competition. So if you don't have this competition set up, then I think it's difficult. So I wouldn't call it an enemy, because obviously we're not having enemies within an organization, but there's definitely other entities that weren't really adhering to our values, and we felt like, okay, we're going to show them, but not to, you know, be better or whatever, but is to make the product better. It always started with the product. It's like, okay, and if we felt the product isn't doing a great service to our customer, we needed to question that. And then by applying our methodology, we ended up succeeding, and a lot of times and other times failing, is because you need to do that fight. You know, the product is the way it is because also certain processes. So if you don't break with those processes and those assumptions, and we were kind of the engine of that, then at the end of the day, the product isn't going to change either. So that kind of daily fight and struggle was at the end what changed the product. It wasn't like we came up with this idea and like all of a sudden everyone's clapping in their hands and then they build a new product, but it's like staying on top of it and figuring out a way to, you know, it's a constant competition. So let's not call it a fight, it's competition, right?
Yeah, but it's a really nice image that you have of it is competition and it is a fight actually, but it's also it's with the interconnectedness there too, you know, and this is one of those, we often use the sort of principles that nature uses in ecosystems, and in every natural ecosystem you have elements that are in competition, and yet they compete to make that system stronger and healthier.
Yeah.
And that's a really nice way of seeing it in a concrete way in a sort of product development or an organization. Pablo?
And Mike, in the way that I see it, or that I interpret what Gana was saying, is focus on the product, because this is what brought you all together, but also find what motivates you all. And it can be another team, it can be another organization, it can be just challenging the way that things are done. And if we all agree on that, this will give the team energy. And this is really interesting. And just starting to bring this conversation to an end, Gana, and thanking you again for the time that you took to speak with us. I see that a lot of the things that we have been talking about, you say that you did it because this is the way that you are. So I can see that there was a lot of intuitive leadership from your side. And then you, throughout the process, you became aware of what things were, as you were saying, motivating people and incentivizing the right behaviors in them, and which things weren't. So the question that I would have for you is, what would you say from your intuition to other people that would like to change their game, the game that they are in, so that they can follow their intuition and motivate others also to follow them to change the game?
I think what drives my intuition is I think there's plenty of books about that. There's all the experiences that I have gone through, and which was quite, I would say, from my perspective, diverse. So I've lived in different countries. I originally was born elsewhere. I grew up here in Germany. Well, there's still East and West. So I've as a human being, I've seen like running water running out of the faucet and having to walk a mile to get water, type of a thing, right? So I guess, and that kind of permeated through all my life, and that encouraged me to also try things that are things that, you know, I haven't tried before, is staying curious. So through all these collection of experiences, you end up building a memory of this, and that drives intuition. So you can't like all of a sudden become a more intuitive person if you don't have that experience in your background. And if your experience just comes from you've lived your life in one place, you've seen only that one thing, the people that you know, you've known forever, then your intuition is going to be flawed. So that's not going to help anyone. But is to have all these diverse experiences, and the diverser the better. And there's plenty of people that have experienced much more diverse things than I did. I think that drives that intuition, and it also builds confidence to give people. I mean, I don't like to give people advice, but maybe speak from confidence, and I think people will resonate with that. They will feel that, they feel like, okay, he must have seen a couple things because he's so confident about this, that they will maybe embrace it. So it's kind of that process. So a way to do this, I guess, is to remind yourself is being okay with being uncomfortable, and also by being very curious, and just there's you sit on a sofa, you could watch a Netflix video, but maybe then you go like, I always wanted to know about, I don't know, where my food comes from, and then you don't watch that Netflix show, but you watch something else that kind of pleases your curiosity, and then you start going on that journey, and maybe eventually you actually go on a real journey and meet real people and learn even more about. And so it's that curiosity that drove me. So maybe that's an innate thing. I feel like observing my kids, me as a parent, I can help them stay curious, or I can kill that innate drive. And I think that's what happens with a lot of people, they get their legs chopped and then they just don't walk out of the door anymore, and they stay put.
That's really, really inspiring. And I really feel also that you speaking from confidence, you speaking from something you embody, you're not just talking about theory or, this is the way it should be. But so, really thank you for sharing that with us and with our watchers. And we really look forward to our next round tables together. Gana.
Cool. Well,
yes,
thanks
Gana,
for your time. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for watching this interview. If you want to know more about what we do in Purpose+Motion to support Gamechangers, we will share the links below. Thank you very much, and wishing you a good day to all.